everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today, this afternoon. If you would like to turn your cameras on, that would be great. And if you could also have yourselves on mute, that would be great because there will be some times this afternoon where I'd like you to get involved as well. So this is about an introduction to self-regulation, executive function in practice and the teaching of self-monitoring and self-awareness. So here we go. So I'm going to quickly run through the agenda for this afternoon. So first of all, we're going to have a bit of a reflection from previous sessions, and we're going to be thinking about what is self-regulation and executive function. Then we're going to be thinking about what is self-awareness and self-monitoring. Then we're going to be looking at the personal, social, and emotional development within our EYFS curriculum and how this links to self-awareness. We're going to be looking at the 4 levels of self-awareness. Then we're going to be looking at Vygotsky and the zones of proximal development and how this links to self-awareness. We're then going to be having a look at mindfulness and self-awareness and self-regulation in the early years. And then we're going to be looking at how self-awareness is taught across different contexts. So first of all, what is self-regulation and executive function? So self-regulation is the ability to manage our emotions, body, attention and behavior so we can cope with those everyday demands. So as we've reflected in previous sessions, for young children, this means being able to calm down with support, stay engaged and respond to what's happening around them. And what executive function refers to is that set of mental skills that help us to plan, focus, remember instructions and manage those impulses. And these skills are really still developing in early years and childhood. And what they do is they rely really heavily on that adult support and the environment. Remember previously we spoke about that co-regulation. In nursery age children, self-regulation, executive functions are not skills that children do on their own. Again, like I've just said, these all develop through co-regulation. So what I thought we would do is I thought we would start with a quick breakout room just so we can reflect on self-regulating executive function and see if you can pull things that you can remember from previous sessions. What I want you to have a think about is what was being asked. Think about a recent situation in your own practice with regards to a child who was maybe struggling or succeeded with their own self-regulation executive function. And I want you to have a think about what was being asked of them. What did you notice? What your response was to them in the moment and your own regulation. So what was happening for you internally, like your stress levels, time pressures, and how might your own regulation have influenced this interaction? I'll pop the questions in the chat for you, but what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put you in a quick breakout room for 5 minutes so you can have a reflection on these questions I've just asked you. And like I said, I will put them in the chat right now. What I will say is, well, my response for that is that when I've reflected on this with regards to me observing other people, the child has been asked to stop the preferred activity at the time, and they were listening to verbal instructions and they were remembering what to do next and to move to a group activity. And what this required was that emotional regulation and that attention and that working memory and those skills that are still very much developing at nursery age. And what I noticed when I was observing this was that there was a lot of signs of dysregulation, such as resistance to transitioning. They were becoming upset and they had a lot of difficulties following those instructions. Also, the environment was very noisy and busy, and the transition happened really, really quickly. So there wasn't any warning. The expectation to shift tasks without support placed a really, really high demand on children's developing executive function. And also, if you think about Shankner and his 5 domains that we've looked at previously, and obviously the environmental factors there that he talked about. Thank you, Donna. I know you've just said it can be hard when the child is busy in the environment and trying to understand and follow all instructions to give to them. You're really right. That's what I'm talking about here. And then obviously what I saw the practitioner doing was that she repeated the instructions and prompted the child to come and sit down. And while this was clear, what it didn't do, it didn't reduce the emotional and cognitive load. The child needed that support to regulate before they could comply. And what she was really doing was focusing on the behavior rather than that underlying need for co-regulation and scaffolding. And when I was thinking about her own regulation and when she was reflecting on it after, she was aware that the routine needed to stay on track, which made her more, I'd say, directive and less flexible. And her own sense of urgency might have reduced her ability to slow down and acknowledge the child's feelings and offer that support. And what I think this did was it likely affected the child's ability also to settle and engage. So for nursery age children, what looks like not listening is often a sign that the demands on their executive function and emotional regulation exceed what they can manage independently in that moment. So
Sorry again, Rebecca. I've just seen there's a message in the chat from Donna.
Yes,
Do you want me to read it out to you?
yes, please.
Yeah, so Donna's put it can be hard when the child is in busy environments and trying to understand and follow all instructions given to them.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Janet. What I've said was we spoke about that previously, and you're right. You're thinking there about that Stuart Shankner and his 5 domains of self-regulation, and that's really, really good that you're beginning to think about the environment as a factor instead of blaming the child. So now what we're going to do is we're going to think about executive function skills and what executive function skills do you most see challenged in your setting. So is it, have a think to yourself here, if you want to pop it in the chat, you can do. So is it emotional regulation? Is it attention and focus? Is it that impulse control, that shouting out, where they're unable to stop any of the behaviors they've got? Is it the transitions between the activities, or is it that remembering of instructions? So for myself, when I go into settings and within my own setting and practice, emotional regulation is the executive function skill I most often see challenged in my setting. So many nursery age children find it difficult to manage big emotions, particularly during transitions, that changes in routines, or when a preferred activity ends. So when emotions escalate, other executive function skills such as attention, impulse control, and that working memory are much, much harder for them to access. And what this often shows up as is that difficulty listening, that increased frustration, or that withdrawal, especially in that busy or noisy environment. This is when I would, like I said, reflect on Stuart Shankner's 5 domains and think about what is causing that behavior, not looking at the child. And in these moments, children typically need that co-regulation in those reduced demands rather than verbal instruction alone to help them feel safe and regulated enough to re-engage with their learning. So next, what I want you to do is just one more reflection task before we move on is think of a time in the past week when a child was frustrated, excited, anxious, or tired, and they needed calming down or understanding their feelings, and how would they show that awareness of what they were thinking or feeling. So this is just a reflection task for you to reflect individually. That's interesting, Natalie, but we're seeing a lot of impulse control in our setting at the moment. In what way, Natalie, are you seeing that? How are they? How is that being shown? So how did you help the child notice these body signals? Did you help the child identify or label what they were thinking? So for example, Natalie there, she's saying there's a lot of impulse control. Are you helping the children to label this? Are you helping them to name that emotion? Were there any tools or routines did you use, or what worked well, or what could you adjust next time? So, for example, in my practice, I help children become aware of their physical sensations and thoughts and feelings by noticing and naming what I observe in that moment really, really quickly. So, for example, if a child is upset after conflict, I might say, I can see that your fists are really tight and that your face looks really frustrated, which helps them connect physically those sensations and emotions. And I also like to ask really simple questions to encourage them to express their thoughts. So, for example, what were you thinking before that happened, or how did that make you feel? And I use strategies such as deep breathing, those movement breaks, which we spoke about before, and visual emotion cards to support that regulation and that reflection. And what I find is these approaches really allow children to recognize their internal experiences, so understanding those feelings, and gradually develop the skills to respond more calmly and thoughtfully in those future situations. And Natalie's saying here, so with turn taking, etc., they've started to use timers to help this, and that's good as well. That's really helping them to reflect. Also, if you're when you're doing that, if you're naming that emotion to them, you seem really, really cross here. So we're going to use some timers here so you can calm, take some deep breathing, and then that's giving them the techniques as well to be able to reflect and build that executive function skill so they can pull it out their toolkit later on. Thank you so much, Natalie. So what is self-awareness and self-monitoring? So self-regulation relies on self-awareness because children and even some adults cannot manage emotions or behaviors effectively if they don't first notice what they are feeling or sensing in their body. So, for example, a child who might notice that their heart is racing or feeling frustrated can then use a calming strategy, like I've just said, like those deep breaths to regulate. So executive function skills work like working memory, cognitive flexibility, and impulse control also depends on that self-awareness. A child who cannot reflect on what they are thinking by anticipating those consequences or noticing that they're losing focus is better able to plan, adapt, and control their actions. So in short, what I like to think of self-awareness as is like the anchor, and without it, self-regulation and executive function are much harder to access. So developing children's awareness of their thoughts, feelings, and those bodily sensations directly supports their ability to manage that behavior and solve those problems independently. Now, what I've got here is I've taken parts of from personal, social, and emotional development. I've taken parts from the self-awareness statements from the self-awareness bit, and we're just going to look at that in a bit of detail now, and I'm going to show you how you can take some of these and use techniques to help you support your children within the classroom. So in the EYFS curriculum, self-awareness is obviously primarily embedded within the personal, social, emotional development area, especially in the self-confidence and self-awareness aspects. So children are encouraged to know themselves, understand their feelings, and recognize what they like and dislike, which helps them to make choices and reflect on their actions. So the foundation of self-awareness directly supports self-regulation as children learn to manage their feelings and behaviors, again, with that co-regulation and that adult guidance. So using strategies, again, such as co-regulations, deep breathing, or movement breaks. It also underpins that executive function skills, including that working memory, that impulse control planning, and that cognitive flexibility. So the personal, social, and emotional areas, managing feelings and behavior and making relationships, further reinforce this connection. And what that does is it helps children to understand how their actions affect others. It helps them to develop that empathy and adjust their behavior in social context. So practical solutions such as, which obviously there's things, if you have a look on the screen, which will tell you, so such as including naming those emotions, offering choices, supporting transitions, and collaborative play, all of which will strengthen the child's self-awareness while simultaneously building self-regulation, executive function. So I think refer back to Development Matters, look at the personal, social, and emotional development, and look at the bit that talks about self-awareness and see what you can pull out of there to put in your toolkit to help support those children further. Now, when we're looking at self-awareness, there are 4 levels to it. So what it is children cannot self-regulate at a higher level than their self-awareness. And self-awareness is the foundation. So if a child doesn't recognize that they're frustrated, anxious, or excited, then what they can't do is choose strategies to calm down or stay focused. So what self-regulation does is it builds on awareness. So skills like taking deep breaths, waiting for a turn, shifting attention, or problem solving only work if the child first notices what is happening internally. So it's really important they begin to notice that and you name those feelings. So implications for the practice of this is that adults need to help children develop awareness of their emotions, thoughts, and bodily sensations before expecting them to manage or control their responses independently. So if I give you an example, a child who doesn't realize that their heart is racing or that they're angry cannot yet choose to pause, breathe, or ask for help. So by supporting this self-awareness through naming emotions, checking on feelings, and noticing those physical cues, what you're enabling children to do is access self-regulation skills really, really effectively. So the concept of the 4 levels of self-awareness is often attributed to psychologist Daniel Goleman, and what he's widely known for is his work on emotional intelligence. And what he does in his framework of his self-awareness is broken down into levels that help individuals understand their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors more deeply. So first of all, what we've got is that physical sensory awareness. So that's the awareness of the body and those physical emotions. And this is like noticing a fast heartbeat, whether if they're feeling tired, if they're hungry, or if they're sensing tension in their muscles. And the early signs in children, sometimes you might know, is that they might be fidgeting, they might be rubbing their eyes or holding a body part that hurts. Next is that emotional awareness. So that's recognizing and naming emotions in oneself. So they might be, if you're feeling angry, frustrated, happy, or anxious, and being able to label it. And the early signs in children of this is if they're crying, laughing, or showing really visible frustration and beginning to express why they feel that way. The next thing we have is that cognitive thought and awareness. So that awareness of those thoughts, beliefs, and intentions. So that's an example of noticing that you're a child being saying that they're worried about the transition, or I can't remember the steps of how to do something. And the early signs of this in children is them asking questions about rules, expressing uncertainty, or them being able to think out loud. And then there's the social rational awareness. And this is understanding how actions, emotions, and thoughts can affect others. An example of this is a child being able to notice that a friend is upset by somebody's behavior or their own behavior, or adjusting their behaviors to cooperate with others. And in children, this might be by them sharing, apologizing, taking turns, or even empathizing with others. So developing each level of these levels of self-awareness supports that self-regulation executive function. So a child must first notice physical or emotional cues before they can manage them or act thoughtfully in those social situations. Now, what we're going to look at now is the zones of proximal development and self-awareness. So self-awareness develops in the zones of proximal development through language modeling and shared reflection, and self-regulation grows from there. And obviously this is Vygotsky. So Vygotsky described the zones of proximal development as the space between what a child can do independently and what they can do with the support of a more knowledgeable other. And we often think about the zones of proximal development in terms of academic learning, but it's just as important for emotional development and self-awareness too. Now, self-awareness develops in the zone of proximal development. So children are not born self-aware in the way that adults are. They learn to recognize their feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations through interactions with others. That's why it's really, really important thing for you to do and teach children within your setting. So in the early years, self-awareness exists first in the zone of proximal development. And this means that children do not yet notice or understand their internal states on their own. So adults notice for them and give them the language for them to experience it. So for example, you'd say, oh, your body looks very wiggly, or I can see you're feeling really frustrated, or your breathing's getting really fast. And what this adult is doing here is the awareness is scaffolded through self-awareness. So with other awareness to self-awareness in the zones of proximal development, adults might draw attention to those bodily sensations. They might label those emotions. They might model that calm reflection. And then what you would see is over time, children begin to recognize these states themselves, and they'll use the same language internally. So they might anticipate how they might feel in certain situations. And this is how self-awareness moves from being social to being internal. So Vygotsky described this as learning that happens. So first between people, then within the child. So when we're thinking about the zones of proximal development, self-awareness and self-regulation depends on that self-awareness. So a child who cannot regulate what they do not yet recognize it. So within the zones of proximal development, adults help children notice before they help them control. So regulation is then co-constructed. So for example, you might say to a child, let's stop and notice your body, or what does your tummy feel like right now, or what can help your body feel calmer. And what you'd find is at first children can only do this with support, and eventually you'd notice they begin to pause, notice, and regulate independently. So, and then when we're thinking about the zones of proximal development with regards to executive function, the same process as I've just spoken about supports executive function. So within the zone of proximal development, adults help children hold goals in mind, monitor that behavior, shift that attention and inhibit impulses. But again, this begins as that shared thinking. So the adult is temporarily acting as the child's executive function until the child can do it themselves. And why does this matter and why is it so important in early years practice? Because this means that when children act impulsively, struggle with big emotions, seen and aware of their behavior, they're not being difficult. They're showing us where their zone of proximal development is. So our role is not to demand independence too early, but to scaffold that awareness, to model that reflection, and then to gradually withdraw that support. So what I want you to do now is have a quick reflection. So if you want to, I'll give you a few minutes to reflect. And if you want to pop it in the chat, that would be great. So what I want you to do is imagine asking a group of 3 or 4-year-olds to line up. Okay. And I want you to think of the exact words you use to guide them. How could you turn that adult language into a shared check-in with the children? Imagine the children asking themselves those same questions. Which part of this process do we often skip and expect children to do anyway? So if we think about it, first, a child cannot monitor themselves. They need us to hold that goal. So the rules and the emotional regulation. So this is other regulation and the child is in their zone of proximal development. So just I'm just going to give you a few minutes to have a think. And if you want to pop some notes in the chat, that would be great. And we'll reflect on them in a minute. Okay, if anybody wants to pop anything in the chat, that would be great. If not, I'll go through it with you and explain what I would do. So I would prompt them with questions such as, what's the goal? What do you say when they go off task? How do you help them notice the mistakes? And then say at this stage, the adult is doing all the monitoring. So executive function needs to be modeled to them. So that goal holding, that error detection, that inhibitory control. Oh, thank you, Donna. So we need to be descriptive in what a line looks like to start with. And is it straight, wiggle it? Yeah, great. So you're thinking about being descriptive to them. So you're breaking it down into small chunks to help them with that working memory. Great. Again, that's the same as I've got here, Donna. So we'll be thinking, thinking about scaffolding it, which you're doing there. So the child is still supported, but we're starting to hand over the thinking. So is the line straight or wiggly? So you're handing over that thinking to them. And what you're doing there is that executive function is developing through that working memory, that cognitive flexibility. And again, that emotional awareness, they're becoming aware. Also, for example, you want children to check what's happening. So if they were building a tower, for example, you'd want them to check their work. Did they do all the parts of it? And what you often find is children will use that private speech. The child will use language as a tool for self-regulation, where they're talking to themselves. And through doing that, that executive function is strengthened, that self-monitoring, that inhibition, and that task persistence, where they're talking through what they're doing. So self-monitoring doesn't develop because we tell children to think or focus. It develops because we model, scaffold, and then we gradually withdraw that support. So that's the same as what you were talking about with what you would do with that line, Donna. So if children are not self-monitoring yet and thinking about what's happening and you're not supporting that, it means the skill is still social, not that it's just not, it's not missing. So mindfulness and self-awareness and self-regulation in the early years, and what does this look like? Now, I love mindfulness and I do it every day with my children, and I've seen so much progress from doing it. And when we talk about mindfulness in the early years, we're not talking about children sitting still and meditating. What we're really talking about is children noticing what's happening inside their bodies. So that's when self-awareness really comes in. So self-regulation can only happen after a child becomes aware of their body, their feelings, and their thoughts. If a child doesn't notice that their body is tense or that they're feeling frustrated, then they can't regulate it. So mindfulness and also yoga, which is really good, practices are really powerful, because what they do is they teach children to notice. So simple things like breathing slowly, stretching, doing a body scan, or paying attention to how their feet feel on the floor help children become aware of their bodies first. This builds that physical and emotional self-awareness, which is the foundation for regulation. And over time, mindfulness also helps children notice their feelings and thoughts. Instead of immediately reacting, they begin to recognize. So they might start to say, I'm getting really cross, or this feels really tricky. And that moment of noticing is really crucial, because what it does is it creates a pause. And what research shows is that mindfulness supports attention, emotional awareness, and emotional regulation. But in early years practice, what this looks like is very, very simple. So children become less reactive. They recover from big, big feelings more quickly. They start to use strategies that have been modeled to them. So what mindfulness does, it also supports executive function by strengthening skills like attention, impulse control, and that self-monitoring. So when children focus practicing on their breath or noting sensations in their body, they're practicing paying attention, shifting that focus, and really staying with a task, which are all core executive function skills. And importantly, mindfulness in the early years is co-regulated, which, as we know from the research, is what self-regulation and executive function grow from. So adults guide the practice using calm voice, language, and modeling. And over time, children begin to internalize this and use it independently, which is exactly how self-regulation develops. When I do mindfulness as well, when we're thinking about Stuart Shankenhurst's 5 domains, I always make sure that the lights are out, it's really calm and quiet, and obviously like it's really dimly lit. So over time, children then will begin to internalize this, and then you can see they can use it independently, which is exactly how self-regulation develops. So rather than seeing mindfulness as an add-on, we can understand it as a way of teaching self-awareness, which then supports self-regulation, executive function. So what I would think about is planning it as part of your day or your curriculum, not just an add-on. It's part of what you teach the children. So mindfulness helps children notice, and noticing supports choice. And then what choice does, it supports that regulation in children. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to watch this video to show a practitioner's mindfulness in practice.
Ами праша, да, вие некога сте биле луди. Ако за мама ќе речи, денес нема подобни играња на мобилен телефон. Какви сте вие? Среќни или луди? Ние не можеме да бараме од детето да не го доживува оно што го доживува. Вежбите за самосвест ни помагаат да ги научиме децата да ги забележуваат своите емоции. Не само своите емоции, туку и емоциите на другите деца. На крајот, кога ќе дојде последниот глас, ги затвораме, ги стегаме ушите. Наша задача не е да ги скормиме емоциите кај детето, туку да го научиме децето да чувствува, да разбере, да го прикаже тие емоции во некоја поприфатлива форма, да го контролира неговото однесување, да го слушне неговото тело. Пишуваме го. Ако го слушаме, пишуваме. колку повеќе им помагаме на децата да развијат оваа вештина, толку ние ќе ги подготвиме порано за реалните ситуации од секојдневниот живот, така на тој начин тие ќе станат експерти со својата лична емоционална интелигенција. Земаме воздух низ носот. Вашето внимание сконцентрирајте го на повигањето на мешот.
Now, the practitioner in this video was naming and labeling different emotions for the children to see and enabling them to become more self-aware, understand and manage these emotions. So as practitioners, it's really important that we use these activities to teach children strategies to become more aware of their physical sensations, thoughts and feelings. So children brought their attention to the present moment through those emotions or that task. Oh, sorry. So let's reflect on mindfulness. So a mindful pause could help children in your setting when they're transitioning, they're experiencing those big emotions, they're struggling to focus or they're resolving that conflict. So what's one micro moment in the day where this could fit naturally? So what I want you to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes quickly to reflect to yourself. And what you think about is that mindfulness strengthens the mental muscles children need before they can manage those behavior, those emotions and those learning. So have a quick think. If you want to pop it in the chat, what you think, if you can answer those questions, and then we'll read them out in a few minutes. If you want to pop anything in the chat, that would be great. But I think a mindful pause could help children in the setting when through all of those things. So when they're transitioning, when they're experiencing those big emotions, when they are struggling to focus, or when they are resolving that conflict. What Donna has said, it would certainly help our children when they are transitioning throughout the day, particularly when the routine changes. They could definitely look at planning this in before meals, after we tidy, to move on to the next task, such as going outside, coming back. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely good with during those transitions to do it, isn't it? Just to refocus them and teach them those techniques. I also like to do it within my setting after when they come in from lunchtime, or they come in from being outside, because I just think it helps them calm and reflect, and that it brings a nice calm and draws them all together. Thank you so much, Donna. Right, so how is self-awareness taught across different contexts? So as practitioners, you can also teach self-awareness in many other ways, not just through mindfulness and yoga. So let's have a think about the pedagogical continuum. And we've looked at this in other sessions, and how that self-awareness can be taught across different contexts and in different ways. So in the early years, self-awareness is taught through intentional adult modeling, that shared reflection, and then that gradual release. And children can recognize and respond to their own internal states independently. So that's when we're at the child-led end of the continuum. So it's really important to remember that self-awareness develops through a graduated shift in your own pedagogy. So if we look at the pedagogical continuum, it will begin as adult regulated, moving to co-regulated in that, and becoming supported independence. So child initiated reflection, and what this does, it mirrors how executive function matures neurologically. So to enable that movement across the continuum, you may first have emotion coaching in real live moments. And what this looks like is the adults name what they see as it happens. So again, I've said this before, you might say your fists are really tight, or you're looking really frustrated. And that validated guide and problem solves helps the children to name this. And why does this build self-awareness? Because the children learn to link those body signals and feelings in situations. And what it also does, it builds that emotional vocabulary and reflection. And the link to executive function here is that inhibitory control, where they're learning to pause, and that cognitive flexibility, where they're thinking of alternatives to manage those emotions. You might do some mirror and photo play. So you might use mirrors or photos of children showing different expressions. And then you might speak to them and say, what do you notice about your face? What might your body be telling you? And what this does, it encourages that recognition of facial expression and body language. And what this really is, it helps children see themselves as individuals and therefore building that self-awareness. So avoid things like saying, what are you feeling? Instead, use language such as, what do you notice? And this does, it reduces that pressure in children. Also, you could use body mapping by drawing or talking, by large paper outlines of the body where children could colour or mark, and they could put where they feel happy, excited, worried or tired on their body. Again, this is building that self-awareness, and this connects physical sensation to emotions, and it's especially supportive for children with really limited language. And again, when we're linking this to that executive function, it's that interoception support of that emotional regulation. Another thing you could look at is choice making with reflection. So after choosing an activity, an adult might ask, how did that choice feel? Was your body calm, or was it feeling busy? And the way that this builds self-regulation, self-awareness, is that the child reflects on preferences and internal responses, and it builds awareness of what helps or hinders them. And when we're looking at executive function, this is looking at that planning and that self-monitoring. You might talk about feelings through storytelling. You might pause stories and ask, how do you think the character's body feels? Have you ever felt like that? And what this does, it builds that safe emotional distance through characters, and it encourages that perspective taking. And what this is linking to then is your personal, social, emotional development and that communication and language. You might have some sensory exploration and comparison. So children might explore textures, sounds and movement, and the adult might ask them, do you like that or not? Is it too loud or is it just right? And this builds self-awareness through developing that sensory preference and boundaries, and supports children who seek or avoid that sensory input. And again, with regards to executive function, then that's developing that attention regulation and that self-control. And then you might have visual scales and check-ins, which is not linked to mindfulness, but they can be simple scales where you're asking children if it's quiet or busy, if there's low energy or high energy, and children can point or place their name as to how they're feeling. And what this does, it teaches children to rate their internal states, and it reduces that behavior only interpretation. And then we think about your role play in small world scenarios. Adults in that can model feelings in role play. So for example, the bear feels left out and his tummy feels sore, or he's got butterflies in his tummy. And what this is, it's building that language for children to use around self-awareness, and it explores emotions through actions, and it encourages that expression without that direct questioning. There's those routines, that predictable language as well that you can use. So the repeated phrases first and then, or your body looks ready, in that line, you're ready to go, or no, I don't think our bodies are ready yet. Again, we're building that self-awareness, and children begin to notice readiness, tiredness, excitement, and it supports that internal monitoring. And also, you yourselves as practitioners are really important for that adult monitoring of self-awareness. You've verbalized the children as well how you feel. So I feel a bit overwhelmed, or I'm going to take a moment, or oh, my body needs to stretch. And children learn self-awareness is normal and manageable, and that it's okay, and it builds that emotional safety and authenticity. So it's important that you model it yourself too. So self-awareness isn't taught through stillness alone. It's built through language, relationships, play, and that reflection. So let's have a think. Remember that self-awareness comes before self-regulation. So I want you to have a think about, how are feelings named in the next video we're going to watch? How are events linked to feelings? And what does the adult do to support self-monitoring? So again, we're about to watch a video. I want you to think about how the practitioner names the feelings. How are the events linked to feelings? And what does the practitioner do to support that self-monitoring?
Okay, let's use our brushes and we try and find a colour monster. Oh, Imogen, which one have you found? Angry. The angry colour monster. Look what Imogen found, Harriet. She's found the angry one. How would I know if you're feeling angry? What would you look like? Try showing. How would you look? Would you have a big smile on your face if you were angry? No. How would you look, Harriet? Oh, that's a good one. Can you show me your angry face? No. Well, which one are you holding, Harriet? Happy? I can see you've got a big smile on your face. Are you feeling happy today? Wow, are you feeling happy today, Imogen? Yeah. Yeah, that's a super happy face. What's making you feel happy today? I'm feeling happy today too. Yeah. I'm feeling happy today because the sun is shining outside. That makes me super happy. Why are you happy, Imogen, today? There's ice cream coming in my window in my mum's car. Is there? Yeah, that's why I'm happy. Do you like it when it's icy? Yeah. It's lovely when it's icy. I like making patterns in the ice. Yeah. Is that what you like doing? Yeah, that's right. And you? How else do we feel when it's icy? What's that sign we do? When it's icy outside, it's a little bit cold, isn't it? Should we try and find another colour monster? You can find another one. In my house. Have you? Yeah, two. You look very happy about that. Yeah. And very excited too. Two pink ones. Two pink ones. Yeah. See if we can find a different one. Can you? Which one has Harriet found? That one. That one. Can you show me your sad face? Oh, that's a good sad face. Where's your sad face? I found something. When might we feel sad? I feel sad. Oh, do you feel sad when it's icy? I was going to say I feel sad when it's raining outside. I feel sad when it's raining. Because when it's raining outside, yeah. I know, we'll talk about that one in a moment. When it's raining outside, what can't we go and do? We can't go and run around. Should we talk about this one? Yeah. What was that one you found? Love, love. The love. What makes us feel love? What do we think? I feel, yes, I feel love when I'm with my mummy and daddy. When I get a nice hug from my friends, that makes me feel love as well. Okay, have we got any more left in there? Which one's this one? The calm one. Are you feeling calm now, Imogen? Yeah, you don't look calm. You look very excited because you're very bouncy today. Very bouncy.
So let me move on. If anybody would like to pop anything in the chat, that would be great. So when we were watching the video, how were feelings named? So she was naming them through obviously talking with the children through the use of the colour monster, and they were linking events to feelings, weren't they, about the sun being outside and how that made them feel, and obviously the little girl talked about there being ice and how that makes her feel happy. And with regards to the adult to do for that self-monitoring, she was obviously showing expressions, and she was talking to the children about how the ice made her feel. Yeah, exactly, Nassi. She was giving really lovely examples there. Thank you so much. Also, the visuals that she was using was the colour monster, so they were linking those emotions to that book and those colours, and she was also using a lot of that repeated language. So she was using the emotions and they were naming them and talking about how they made everybody feel. And at the end there, when that little girl was bouncing up and down, she said to her, you know, you're bouncing up and down, so you're feeling really excited. So again, she was developing that self-awareness in that child by noticing that by bouncing up and down, she was feeling excited inside. So in the early years, that self-awareness is really developed through that intentional adult pedagogy rather than the expectation of that independent self-regulation. So practitioners support children through explicitly linking feelings to events, like she was with regards to the weather, or using clear, that consistent language to help children notice and name their internal states. So that lady did it really well through that adult modeling, that co-regulation and that guided reflection. And then what the children children were learning to do is recognize how experiences about their emotions and behavior. And then what you would notice is over time, this shared noticing enables children to monitor their own responses and make those increasingly independent choices. And what it's doing is laying that foundation for self-regulation and executive function. So this approach prioritizes understanding before control and recognizes that self-awareness must be taught through those relationships, that language, and that repeated everyday interactions. And what we need to do is, if we think back to our EYFS curriculum and within the EYFS framework, self-awareness is developed primarily through those prime areas of that personal, social, and emotional development and that communication and language. And what happens here is practitioners teach self-awareness by modeling and extending that emotional language. So helping children to identify and talk about their feelings and by explicitly linking emotions to events and experiences. So what you need to remember as practitioners is through those warm, responsive interactions and co-regulations, what you're doing is you're supporting children to notice their internal states and understand really how these influence their behavior. And over time, this intentional pedagogy enables children to manage themselves more independently, which will then support the EYFS goal of self-regulation and forming those positive relationships and really becoming really, really confident, engaged learners, which is what we all want for our children. So thank you so much for joining me today. What I would really appreciate now is if you could scan the QR code on the screen just to give us a bit of feedback. I'll just give you 5 minutes to do that quickly, and then I will tell you what else is coming up from the hub. Okay, thank you everybody. So coming up from the hub on the 11th of February, we are running another focus on self-regulation executive function. And what we're going to be looking at is creating a community of collaborative learners, and we're going to be looking at that physical activity. Again, there's more bespoke advisory sessions from the hub, so you can book in for one-to-ones with either myself or some other fantastic practitioners who work for the hub. We have room leader networks coming up for babies, 2-year-olds and 3 to 4-year-olds, and we also have half-termly early years SEND networks, which are face-to-face and online. And then look out as well, because we are having local area conferences. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found it useful, and hopefully I will see you all in a month's time. Thank you so much.